Hello everyone, welcome to the Herefordshire Green Network event, or the gathering this week. And I'm Gordon Coppock, I'm Vice Chair of Herefordshire Green Network, and we have a large group joining us tonight to listen to the discussion between Councillor John Harrington. He's the Hereford County Council Member for Infrastructure and Transport, and he represents the Hereford Ward of Hampton on behalf of the our county party. And then we got Professor Les Lumsdon, formerly Director of Institute of Transport at the University of Central Lancashire, and very involved with transport ever since. And it's going to be a lively conversation, we hope. And there'll be opportunities for you to put questions on the chat function during, and also during the breakout sessions. We'll be splitting up into groups of about 10, and we're trying to have then a period of time for you to introduce yourselves, and then briefly come across with any questions we might have, and then have some group questions from each of the breakout sessions. So just some housekeeping then. Luckily we don't have to do a fire drill, and I don't have to show you where the fire exit is, but if we could keep muted whilst the talks are going on, and generally during the evening session, and please turn off the video if you don't want to be recorded. The session is being recorded, as we said on the invitation, but you're welcome to turn it off if you don't want to be included on that. Use the chat to send a private message to HGN admin if you've got any questions about HGN itself, or membership questions. Or if you've got any questions about using Zoom, go to HGN admin or Richard Abansky. They're the two people trying to help this evening with keeping it all going. And use the chat to share info or links or anything you want, and we'll keep a record of that and keep that as an updated part of the meeting. Okay, so we'll have more information as the evening goes on, and we'll go on to the breakout sessions. And then at the end, so a few minutes for summing up, and after a question and answer session after the breakout sessions. Okay, so any questions, stick them on the chat, and we'll hand over to Kate now, who'll be chairing the session with Les and John. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. Hi, I'm Kate. I'm currently co-chair of Herefordshire Green Network. And I'm going to just put into the chat the itinerary for the evening, so you can see how we're working things. So you can see, as Gordon said, we've got the discussion, then we've got breakout rooms, 20 minutes for you to talk and to develop your own responses to what you've heard, and then an opportunity to come back into the full session and some time to sort of share your thoughts about what's come up. So I'm going to, without further ado, hand over to John and Les. And you have been introduced by Gordon. Would you like to introduce yourselves in any other ways, or are you happy just to dive into a conversation framed around Herefordshire transport?
Okay, who's kicking off? Me? Yeah. Hello.
Sounds like.
Hello, everyone. Look, I've been researching transport for more years than I care to think. And in the past decade or so, I've moved to campaigning, lobbying more. And you know, in Herefordshire, I've had a dialogue with 5 previous portfolio holders: Messrs. Wilcox, Rome, Durkin, Powell and Hamilton. I've remembered all 5 of them. And, you know, not one has really had a significant discussion or interest in climate change and what transport is bringing to this dilemma that we are facing right now. And so they presided over fairly regressive policies in transport. And I'm delighted to say that we've got a person with us this evening who does recognise that the major issue facing us is how to reduce CO2 emissions in the transport sector. Now, I find that quite refreshing after all of these other conversations I've had with previous portfolio holders. I mean, after all, the latest government document is telling us that surface transport accounts for 27% of the emissions. In Herefordshire, discussion with some of the officers, it's higher, it's 32% possibly. This is a major problem for us. And government seems to tell us that, yeah, electric cars, that's it. Let's move forward very quickly on that. But my understanding and my research tells me that it's not only electric cars. In fact, we need to reduce the number of vehicle trips or journeys, and we need to reduce the vehicle mileage, both locally, on a county level and nationally. So, John, there's no pressure then, is there? And I'd like to hand over you to tell us what you've been doing, what you're up to, because you've been there over a year now in that great institution. So, John, would you like to respond?
Hello.
John, you haven't left the room already, have you?
Let's have a look. He was there last
There
time.
he's
There he's muted. I think when he needs to be unmuted.
I had
That's
a
the
mute.
way I like it.
I'm trying to unmute him, but the system doesn't seem to be allowing me to unmute him. Give me a second. Apologies, John. I'm clicking on unmute.
So beautifully primed as well.
Unmute. Why is that not working?
John needs to press it at his end as well.
Yeah, I think it usually comes up that you're offering the option to unmute.
I'm trying to find John's picture. There's so many people. John, can you try and unmute yourself?
Trying to. You know, this has become rather like the conversations I used to have with the previous portfolio holders.
John, can you click on unmute?
There he is, right there.
There we go. It kept saying that you can't. It kept saying that you can't unmute yourself because the host is trying to unmute you. So I just kept waiting and trying.
Okay, apologies.
Okay, right, great. So thanks, Les, and yeah, no pressure. I mean, I presume that we're just going to talk fairly openly tonight. Obviously, it's a public meeting, and you know, everyone will have an interest in it. So we will be as honest as we can be. I mean, I must just say from the off that actually, you know, I must give credit to the previous administration because they did actually support the climate emergency declaration, and without that, I think we'd be quite a way behind. And there are many people within that administration who have, you know, sensible views, and that's not to say that they believe my personal views or not on issues, but they are certainly concerned about the environment and about carbon reduction. So I'll be a bit fair to start with. What have we been doing for 18 months nearly? Or it depends who you talk to. Some people think we've been in for 3 years and done sweet FA. Some people think we've been in for shorter than that. But we have had a tough year. We obviously had COVID, and we've had before that quite significant flooding. So we seem to have been wrapped up and diverted by quite a lot of things. And both of those issues had quite an impact on officer resource, flooding within within both the transport cohort and actually the other cohorts, but certainly COVID had a huge impact on staff because a lot of staff were taken off all sorts of different projects and departments to help with the volunteer response as we geared up for what we thought was going to be something that was more impactful on us, and unfortunately it wasn't in a way in Hereford. I suppose the most significant thing is that we came in as a mixed administration, and we had a slightly, well, we had mixed views, but we had a different view from the previous administration on what was the best solution to deal with congestion and the transport issues that Hereford has, and also to respond to the climate emergency. Because, you know, there is only so many times you can say you believe that the climate emergency is necessary, that you believe that the planet is heating up, that we cannot, you know, that you believe that we cannot go on consuming finite resources in a finite world and yet not do anything about it. And so as we came in with 3 different groups, the Independents, It's Our County, and the Greens, all with slightly different, you know, ideas on what was the best way forward. And we've actually worked very well together since we came in. And the first thing we said we'd do is we said, look, we obviously all have our own party kind of views or group views on transport and carbon reduction, the climate emergency. Well, let's review these schemes. They're contentious. You know, our issue of bypasses is Herefordshires equivalent to the Brexit issue, isn't it? You know, we've been talking about this for 40 odd years of how, you know, whether or not Hereford needs a bypass or not. We were sort of fairly entrenched in a view, but not necessarily backed up by the funding, despite sort of some of the narrative that was coming out. I mean, it's very obvious that we didn't have funding for certain things, and whether we were going to get it or not was another issue, but some things were certainly more advanced. The first thing we had to deal with was that the Southern Link Road, which is part of the South-Wide Transport Package, was about to run out of planning permission. So it was quite an unusual position for us to be in as administration that came in, some of us against the idea of that scheme. And the very first thing we had to do was we thought we agreed amongst ourselves that it was important to preserve that permission, because if we were going to have a meaningful review, we did have to leave options open for continuing schemes that had been agreed in previous administration. I mean, as it happens, events overtook us for a variety of different reasons, which I don't necessarily need to go into here. But you know, this is a really good opportunity for us to look at the issues that affect Hereford, and to look at our issues of congestion, and to look at our issues of carbon reduction. We are a small city. We are, you know, we have a city where over 50% of people travel less than 2 miles daily. So we have people who would, you know, get in a car at Belmont to drive to, you know, to work at Dunelm, or to drive to Rotherwas. You know, I know people who live in Widemarsh Street and will drive into town to collect something. So we're a city that is actually very compact. We are an ideal we're an ideal city for modal shift, for example, to take place in, if all the criteria add up. We don't have the infrastructure for that, and we haven't had the investment in that, but that's not to say that isn't something we should be considering. We also, many of us believe that we should have another river crossing, but where that crossing is and whether that's a bypass or river crossing is a subject of debate. And my personal view is that the resilience issue of having another bridge is important, but I think that it should be a city bridge and not necessarily something further out. That's not the view shared by everyone, and that's the point of the review. So we've commissioned this review, and we're coming towards the end of it. It was delayed by a couple of months because of COVID, and the disruption it caused with officers progressing it. But we're getting to the point where we're going to have a clear picture coming back to us on what is compatible with Hereford's particular traffic congestion issues and what's compatible with a climate emergency. So that's enough waffle. You can challenge me now a bit more, Les, on some of the specifics.
Well, I mean, one thing that always tickles me is the difference between the words and the budgetary arrangements. So in terms of the budget, I think because it moves us on to what's possible. I was looking at the budget, and there's 5.5 million for Hereford City improvements. What's that? What are
well, actually, I don't think that's anything at all to do with transport. Actually, that's to do with the public realm in the centre of the town.
Oh, so it is to do with transport, because walking.
Well, it is. Indeed, yeah.
Bars out where we all want to breathe and shop and play and whatever. But the one that excites me, John, and I think you should raise this because people will be very interested, because this could have a real impact, is the 39 million over a 4-year period or 5-year period for electric passenger transport fleet, because that could be, in my opinion, professionally, a game changer, because I've seen it as a game changer in many cities right across Europe under the population of 100,000. So what's the idea behind this? You have to excuse me, everybody. I live in Ludlow, so I get as much about Shropshire as I do about Herefordshire. So please forgive me.
We'll forgive you living in Ludlow, which I always think is a kind of smoother version of my town of Leominster, which I think has got much more character and much more real. But you know, we'll excuse you being in the posher town.
Yeah, I know, it's the coffee shops that count.
But no, I mean, that's a very good point. So because we have such a small population contained, well, not such a small population, but because our population in the city is contained so much within the city, the percentage. So as I said, 50% of the people in Hereford travel less than 2 miles by car within the city.
Yeah.
The figures for our through traffic is about 7%. The figures for our journeys just outside to just inside is about 20%, and vice versa. And actually 40% is totally within the city itself. So actually a bus system would be really good. And I don't know if you all remember that at the end of the 80s, we had a really brilliant system. I mean, they weren't great buses, but we had the hopper system in Hereford. We had the green and the yellow hoppers, and they worked fantastically well. And actually, if you talk to anyone, regardless of their political or ideological background or anything like that, if you talk to them about the hopper system, almost everyone remembers them fondly, who can remember them, because obviously you'd have to have been a certain age to have remembered them at the end of the late 80s. Unfortunately, obviously, the bus deregulation came in at the end of the mid-80s, 86, and what happened then was that the company that was running them started taking a lot of the stock across to Worcester. It was working really well in Hereford, but they started taking a lot of the stock across to Worcester because the point of the deregulation was supposed to increase competition, but all it meant was that people like some local unnamed bus companies were just arriving sort of 5 seconds before another bus, and kind of in a sense they drove certain efficiencies down and actually made it less efficient, less profitable for some companies to stay in the market. And actually that's exactly what happened to the hopper. It was kind of driven out in a way, and they got to the point where they, partly because they were taking stock to Worcester, where they were kind of making more money as a private entity, they got to the point where they got below that certain frequency that you need to trust a bus service. So we have buses in Hereford, but for all sorts of reasons, they're not the best in terms of regular scheduling and in terms of cost. And so people, if you stand out and wait for a bus and expect to get to work, you may not do that, or it may cost you a lot more. So something like an electric hopper system would of let's say 50 or 60 buses, of which a certain proportion would be, majority probably would be in the city, but a proportion of them would go out and provide a good service to the market towns and to the rural villages, is a plan, is a scheme that could really work. And it could take a large amount of that traffic, especially that local traffic of people sort of getting in a bus at Belmont to go and work at Rotherhurst or to go and shop at Dunelm. They could reliably come out and expect a bus to be there every 5, 10, 15 minutes. And with all the interactive and sort of digital technology now, they could be even more confident of spending, as little as possible standing in the rain. We haven't got the money for it, but we have allocated it within our budget because we want to bid for it, and we are going to bid for it. The issues you come up against all the time is because of the deregulation of the buses, you've got to essentially, find a way of working within the environment, which is a private market, and you have competing companies, as I said, who don't really like sharing things. So you're going to be trying to get several, quite sort of strong, not necessarily large, but certainly strong identity bus services and characters who run those services to work together. And that's one of the questions that we've got to face. Because I think I think for this to be really effective, you've got to be really confident that you get the buy-in. And there are some issues around using the private market to deliver this, because, for example, all the stuff that was coming through in terms of providing subsidies for electric buses, when you actually drill down into detail, government, like it always likes to do, like the councils do, like we do as well, they like to make a grand announcement, but actually the reality of that detail is often, either it's something that's already been announced 7 times before and you're just getting more credit for it. But actually the reality of the detail is often quite interesting. So, for example, the electric bus kind of grants that were coming out, just a few 6 or 7 months, or whatever it was, they didn't actually offer free buses in a sense, or subsidized buses. What they offered is an opportunity for bus companies like Yeomans or DRM to buy an electric bus for, you know, whatever they cost, because the larger ones are quite big, not the hoppers. I think I'd prefer a hopper system, but the larger ones are quite big. To buy an electric bus for about 400 grand, of which the government would pay the difference between that and your existing old diesel bucket. Now, those diesel buckets don't cost, you know, Nigel Yeomans or DRM or anyone money, in a sense, that they've already bought and paid for them. So the incentive for them to then switch to make a very serious investment in electric is difficult to do with the current market. And in a way, the demand is not there, obviously, for them to, you know, to actually, you know, to want to invest, because they can't see that, and there isn't in Hereford, because of the way we've got used to travelling, there isn't that kind of, you know, immediate demand for those buses. And so we've been looking at all sorts of ways of making this work, but we're determined to make it work, and hopefully with our partners locally, like DRM, Dave Morris and Nigel and everyone else. But another option may be to look at different ways of doing that, including being quite radical. And, you know, we might say, why not provide a free bus service? The legislation is very, very restrictive, and it was tightened up even further by Chris Grayling, actually, which meant that you couldn't even really run arm's length companies like Nottingham City Transport have done. So it all comes down to this definition of what a public service vehicle is. And actually, I think one of the ways around controlling more centrally a bus service would be to say that, you know, that it was free transport, and then to find a way to subsidise that in a way that was, you know, that a way was in a way that was sort of sufficient. You know, you might use the car parking revenue for it. You might do all sorts of other things.
Yeah.
So,
well, let me interject there. The thing is, John, that there are 100 cities across the world that have introduced free public transport. Many of them since the 1990s, and with great successes. And it's typical, really, that everybody, oh, what will that cost? That's what everybody is saying. But actually, the benefits that accrue from that type of investment is considerable, because you make a radical change of behaviour in many respects. People sell their second cars and so on and whatever. Okay, there might be some minor pitfalls to it. But I want to move on a bit. There's one other thing, because I know many of the people who've joined us tonight are from rural patches as well. And just to say that, you know, my opening gambit about, I think we should focus on reducing carbon emissions and its decarbonisation, because otherwise there isn't a tomorrow to discuss the next 4 years or 8 years, because we'll be reeling from it. And you know, the flow from the market towns into Hereford is one big flow, and also the activities around the market towns. That accounts for quite a share of the current CO2 emissions by cars. And some of that could be changed through electric vehicles, some of it from the bus network, and thirdly, some through what we might call, you know, super cycleways or multimodal ways. But can I come back to the other one that I think is the hidden giant here, which I know some of your officers, I've spoken to them, are very keen on actually working more on, and that is getting walking and cycling way back into the picture, like it was when I was younger. And Hereford itself as a city lends itself, as you said, but also Ross-on-Wye does, Kington does, Bromyard does. You know, everywhere could really change what they do with their central zones and give it back to people by using non-motorised transport. So you're getting a lot of, the jargon is co-benefits from some very basic changes to infrastructure in these towns. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, I agree, and you know, as I said, the city is actually very compact. Hereford City is very compact, and very, you know, the distances are not huge, and we don't really have a topography that causes us issues, apart from Ayleston Hill, perhaps, you know, and they're college students, so it's okay for them to put a bit of extra effort in. But I totally agree, and it comes down to this. It does come down to this issue of good infrastructure. So, you know, I couldn't, in all good conscience, expect people to cycle around Hereford happily at the moment. Not just because of some of the measures I've brought in recently have been, you know, criticised, but and adjusted. But generally, you know, we haven't got decent cycling infrastructure, I don't think. And the kind of infrastructure that we've done has always been a sort of add-on to sort of road projects. And I had this conversation when I went to see Baroness Veer, who's the roads minister in the House of Lords. And, you know, you look at DFT funding, which is pretty much where you've got to get money from at the moment if you want to do something with transport. And there's about 3/4 of the document is about how you should be looking at sustainable transport options, how you should be, you know, be conscious of the climate emergency, the Paris Agreement, and everything else, and how you should be measuring it. But and then the back sort of quarter is about roads if you want to build a road. But actually, all the money is for the roads. It's not for anything else, really. You know, you can have 100 million for a road, but you can have 6 million to try and do some cycle paths. And the problem is that infrastructure costs money, and it's a matter of priorities. And I went to a parish council meeting when I first came in. Actually, it was Councillor Leicester's parish council. And, you know, he happened to sort of mention that this was the, you know, the cabinet member that was responsible for, you know, looking at the roads and looking at the bypasses. And there was a few sort of angry, you know, people who were sort of saying, you know, it's common sense. And, you know, and I said, well, you know, it's not, there are other ways to do things. And we need to look at that. And he said, well, where are you going to get the money for cycling? And I said, well, you know, you could spend a fraction of the amount of money and achieve a really good infrastructure. Well, not a fraction, let's say, but significantly less than building a road, and achieve really good infrastructure for cycling that would have the same outcomes, potentially. And I spoke to Brian Deegan earlier this week, and he was talking about a conversation he had in Westminster where he sort of said, I want £1 billion for Manchester. And everyone went, ho, 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 you know. And he said, well, why are you laughing? £1 billion would mean that I could completely, you know, completely transform Manchester, you know, make all the networks really good, increase the networks, you know, iron out any kinks, segregate the routes, you know, make it something that people use every single day. And you think that's a joke? You've just committed to spending 1.5 billion on a junction in Bedfordshire, single junction. And so it does come down to this to some extent, you know, as people understanding that actually investment in cycling and walking and infrastructure in cycling and walking is just as critical and deserving of financing as roads are.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're up for that if that's the, you know, if that's the best thing to do. And also in relation to that, you don't just have to have one solution. And I think, you know, me and my colleagues from the opposition parties that have different view on things, you know, I think the problem I've had in the past is that for 12 years or whatever before that, we've kind of lived with one solution. You know, we've kind of aspired to this one solution, which is, you know, we're going to build a bypass that's going to cure all our problems. But we didn't really have any other, I don't know why, perhaps it's just, you know, officer lethargy or narrow focus from on a political side, but we didn't seem to sort of bring in other other methods or other, you know, look at other modes that could go alongside it. And that, you know, once again, that's it comes down to an element of where you put your resources and sharing it out a bit, being a bit more. Okay,
I've got that, and I completely agree. It's roads, 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 and that's what we need to change, because ever since I learned how to forecast road traffic, I've realised that it's an absolute nightmare. And if you look at the demand for roads in Herefordshire, well, there aren't great increases that we're told. But there are some other barriers that I'd like to tease you with, John.
We've got about 5 minutes left. Just so
I know, and I wanted to get at least 3 minutes of those 5 in.
Okay, go for it, Les.
You can have them all.
The one is, let me just list what I think are the major problems, barriers to overcome, and then you can nod when they tell you the time's up. One is a media backlash, because the media wants a good story to read rather than a balanced story. And Bridge Street today is just a classic example of it. And maybe Gordon, at the end, when we have you know, the roundup session, we can talk about what the silent majority can do to help John and his colleagues against this media backlash. And the second thing is businesses, because businesses deal in a certain way that you know, actually lacks innovation in many respects. In other product respects, it might be there. And the third one is the population, the basic conservatism with a small c, that people don't like change, even, you know, if they've got a habit or whatever. Habitual behaviour is hard to change. And so, and then you did mention something about officer lethargy. In a sense, you know, it's about officer resource as well. That, you know, if you want to change TAC, you need other specialists in there that are perhaps there now. And of course, you can change roles for people. But sometimes I think if you've been under those 5 portfolio holders that I mentioned before, then you might be on a set track and running down that track. And it's not easy to change that. So there, and you've got
okay.
to respond.
I got 20 seconds. So a media or even a public backlash is a very real possibility. And I think that as politicians, you have a responsibility to try and, you know, if you believe you're doing the right thing, you have a responsibility to do that and not to be populist if you can, you know, if you can help it. I'd rather we did what we thought was the thing that we were voted in to do and the right thing to do. And if we get voted out next time round, well, you know, that's life. And so I can live with that. The important thing is to make sure that you distinguish between the noise and people making legitimate concerns. So I got slightly ambushed by a bunch of taxi drivers and businessmen to a meeting that Jesse, PA called, but then Jesse didn't make and the PA didn't want to chair. So I had to chair this meeting of about sort of 40 angry people. But a lot of them were just upset about struggling on the high street and COVID and everything else. But actually some of them made some very specific points. And one of those with the taxi, saying that we should be allowed to go over the bridge because we're considered public transport. We're allowed to do it in other places like London. And so you've got to, so I thought that's a very valid point. Other people wanted their car parking space on the other side, kind of, you know, easier for them to access. That wasn't in a way such a valid point in my view. So it's understanding that it is being brave, but it's also being sensible and reactive, especially when proper concerns are coming in, and especially from businesses. And I think our communications are probably not being very great, and officers seem to have this reticence to kind of shout anything. You know, they say you're being, you know, they don't want to be seen as being political. And I think, well, hang on a minute, you know, we've come in. Why can't we be? You know, why can't you, you know, show what we're trying to do? But that's something we're working through. And in relation to people that don't like change, I think you're right. And actually, I'm always reticent to kind of punish people by, you know, bringing in sort of, you know, car park levies and things like that, rather than say, well, look, guys, here's an option to do something a different way. So if you can do something a different way, give it a go. You know, get used to it. COVID's a classic example. I'm finishing now, but COVID's a classic example of us saying that we couldn't possibly do things without, you know, without being in a car and doing things. And suddenly we're doing lots of business by the internet, and we're cycling, and we're doing everything else. So there is always a way to do something if you make it attractive, if you give people options. And that's what it's all about. Give them an option if they want to use, you know, to travel a different way.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Thanks, both of you. That was a fantastic conversation to listen into. Well, I hope you found that useful, everybody. What we're going to do is spend the next 15 minutes just going through, hearing a little bit of what was said in the rooms, and I'm going to invite somebody from each group. I don't know whether you chose a rep or whether the group facilitator might be the one who feeds back, but if just a sense of the sort of main question that was coming up from you, or the main thought that was coming up from your group, would be really helpful. And maybe I'll start that with Beth. Where are you, Beth? And whether it's you, Beth. Oh, I see you. Yeah, and it's you feeding back, Beth. Just a little.
I passed all responsibility on to William Wilding.
Great. Okay, William. Then it's all yours.
I'm unmuted. Hi.
Hi.
Hello, John. It's nice to meet you. I haven't seen you before. What we were discussing was, our headline was, you know, the thing about the media backlash and changing people's perceptions of what was going on. Ghent in Holland was mentioned as a place where politicians had basically bitten the bullet and introduced things quickly before anyone had a chance to not like them, and suddenly they found they were there and they're okay. I guess the thing that was coming in as a sort of question before we got sent back to the meeting was to John, was that given the changes you've made and the sort of the backlash you had from them. Can you think of anything that you could introduce that would give people something positive, an actual positive thing that they would, a bit like the Eat Out to Help Out, which supposedly worked very well, i.e. they got a bit of a present of £5 every time they bought a burger. Give something to the transport in town that would make people think, hang on, this could be good. This is a positive thing that's actually good for us. Obviously, if you could wave your magic wand and bring in 50 hopper buses with free hopper buses overnight, that would be brilliant. But obviously, you can't do that. But something smaller scale that the media would have to go, wait a minute, this is good.
That's a great thought, Will. Thank you. I'm going to let John and Les come back to all questions at the end, so we'll hold that one. That was great. Thank you. Anything else, or is that's you?
That's it.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Okay, can we go to Ant, your group? Is it you or is it somebody else, Ant?
It's us. Just thank you, John and Les, for a very interesting chat. Our group was quite interestingly made up of people, city dwellers, or one just on the city limits, which was quite interesting. Viv has our feedback and questions.
Okay, we sort of ended up talking about or discussing what carrot and sticks might help our situation. And one of our members has experience in Reading, and a stick could be that you keep increasing parking fees, and that these are increased every year with some sort of formula that took into account inflation and other factors. And the carrot could be a travel card that could be used within Herefordshire that would allow it would allow you access to trains, buses and barrel bikes, and you could move between all three modes and maybe other things. As long as the buses had realistic and the travellers were offered realistic and timely choices. That was, I think, a nice phrase. I'll leave it at that.
Brilliant. That's lovely. Very, very nice reflections there. Thank you. Thanks. Temi, we go to your group.
Carol is our spokesperson.
Carol.
So take it away, Carol.
Okay, thank you.
Am I back on now? Thank you. Well, we were interested in that we all lived outside of the town, so we all had a rural perspective, and similar issues, I think. The two questions we came out are as follows. The first was, how do we ensure involvement and understanding of demographic groups who are not necessarily able to be involved in active transport, e.g. older and disabled people and inhabitants of rural villages? And the second one was, again, was focused very much on rural villages where we all share a problem of traffic speeding through the village, and with parish councils finding it very difficult to do anything about it, is what can be done to help rural villages to have more control over speed and safety of vehicles going through the village. So those were the two that we had. And I think with the first one, we were mindful that, but much so I support the present administration, that the PR for that, the Harwich job in Hereford City had not got its message through to people who feel discomforted by it. And it only takes one old lady who's ill but not disabled to feel that she can't get to the bank in Broad Street, for a whole village to feel that it's not a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Carol. Good points. Thank you. Great. Okay. Tony, your group. Tony, where are you? Tony Hagan?
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so we talked about shared transport sort of obviously being tricky at the moment because of COVID, but hopefully having technology enabled lift sharing as an option. we also talked about cycling. Reducing the speed in the city would make it safer for cyclists, which we now have the 20 mile per hour, but also about road space engineering, that actually some of the roads are still just very, very difficult to negotiate as a cyclist. And the fact that a lot of estates now don't have through routes or alleyways as they used to, so that was a barrier to cyclists, and also how modal, changes brought about by COVID, the fact that a lot of people will be doing online shopping now anyway. But the question sort of that I'm presenting is about park and ride for people coming into the city. Is park and ride a viable option? And if you could get onto a hopper bus, would it mean that you could actually, would there be bus only routes? Could you provide a sort of bus only route so that you could be guaranteed of not sitting in a traffic jam? Because I think that would be an incentive, obviously, to a lot of people. If you were going to sit in a traffic jam on a bus, you probably aren't going to go for that option. Just quickly see if I've missed something. I think that's the sort of biggest question. And then again, also, gear change, the government document which was looking at towns, cities that could be studies on sort of changing modal shift. Is that something that Herefordshire is going to try and apply for? Is it worth applying for that? And the support from, do we have support from MPs?
Lovely. Thank you, Tony. Brilliant. I feel slightly like I'm on the Eurovision Song Contest, and now we're going to Gordon, please, in Kington.
Hi, yeah, it's Simon that will be doing this for us. Simon Leanne. Would be good on you.
Yes, hi, it's Simon Lenane, I'm a GP in Ross and Wye, so I'm obviously interested in the health aspect of it. We talked a bit about essentially trying to reduce demand. There's no sense in changing the modality of transport. If we change into electric vehicles, there's still a massive embedded carbon in those. So really, actually, what can we do to reduce demand? But I think the question we settled on was really how we were all from very rural places, how we can improve cycling links between the market towns. That seems to be really important, just in terms of employment, in terms of access to other things, just to be able to make transport between the villages and the market towns. Market towns are there for a reason, because they were developed because it was somewhere that you could walk to and back in a day. That's why they're all spaced out at this kind of distance. And so actually, what can we do to try and make it feasible for people to get in and out of town in a sustainable way? That was our question. I'm not sure I've got answers, but that was our question.
That's great. Thank you very much, Simon.
That's good.
Okay, we'll go to Will's group, please. Will, wherever you are.
Thank you. Hello. Yes. Yes, we had a good discussion, and quite a number of the things we talked about have already been covered. But I think really the theme that ran through everything we talked about was integration. We feel that integration of public transport within Herefordshire is desperately lacking, really. So I'd like to ask John if there is an integrated transport strategy, and whether it will come out of whether something new may come out of the review that we're going to see in about a month's time. We touched on the business of abuse of country roads by HGVs, and the feeling that parish councils have really no practical, although they may comment on them, they feel they've got no power. That's already been covered, I think. Cycling, radial cycle routes from market towns, and particularly coming into Hereford, where the radial routes are not attractive to cyclists. Buses are obviously low ebb at the moment. The information on the revised timetables has been poor, and of course that brings us back to the long-awaited transport hub beside the railway, which again is part of integration. I mean, also with integration, we feel there's sometimes a disconnect between the officers who are responsible for particular modes, for instance, cycling and buses. Ideally, the whole thing should be joined up for the benefit of all the users. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Will. And the last group is Richard Avansky.
Thanks, Kate. I'll give our discussion 12 points, and if you want to, our conversation discussion was around rural transport. Alyssa will be feeding back. Over to you.
Thank you.
Alyssa.
Lovely. Hi, Alyssa. Where is she? Where's Alyssa?
So, what is Alyssa's name on the list? I can't see Alyssa.
Swinglehurst, is it? Alicia Swinglehurst, where are you? I can't see you either, unfortunately. I did notice you earlier on, but I can't see you now. I wonder if she's had a dodgy internet connection moment.
No, I think I'm there now. Right, marvelous.
Oh,
okay, sorry, thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Yeah, so again, we were another kind of rural group. First thing that emerged is I think there are different strands here. There's a strand that's about congestion in Hereford, and there's a strand that's about climate change. It's not that they don't interrelate, but they are also different and separate. And so when we were talking about, like Richard was referring to the park and ride scheme, going to Rotherham to the park and ride. So in order to get to the Rotherham park and ride, you drive from Orcop to Rotherham. Now the extra mileage to get from the A49 into Rotherham to get to the park and ride, and frankly you could just drive wherever it is you're going. So this is about congestion. That choice is about congestion, I think. So there's a sort of separate thing. It's climate change and congestion. Obviously the rural areas are a challenge. It would be lovely. It would be lovely to have hopper buses going around our 2,000 miles of road, and any 10 minutes moment that you stand there, another bus will come on. I really don't think that's possible. So we have to look at what the other solutions might be, and that's where it gets kind of quite challenging. Obviously in rural areas, what tends to happen is you identify the problems, rat running, HGVs, air quality issues due to agriculture, that we have a different set of problems to the city of Hereford. And indeed, some of the Hereford problems then can have a direct impact. So we also have Councillor Balderson on our group, and her area is very impacted by rat running, which John will be very well aware of. So there was a doubt, where are they going to lie that are sort of scalable and niche to the rural situation, where you may only be one, possibly two people who might ordinarily car share anyway. It does happen. We don't need technology to car share. You just need to say, I'm going somewhere, do you want to come? But that's where it gets difficult, because we say, well, if I wanted to get, we'd have like some single transport that's electric that can get me from where I am to where I want to go on a demand-led service. But I could just have electric taxis. On the other hand, I could just have an electric car and offer a lift to my neighbour when I'm going somewhere. So I think there are kind of real world solutions, and a lot of them are already taking place, but just not formally. And however much we might wish that we're all going to abandon our cars, anyone who wants to cycle from down here to Hereford along the A466, I wish them luck. These roads are not built for cycling, and apart from things, they're very, very hilly. The actual topography is not good in this part of the county, and a lot of our population are elderly and maybe less able. So there are very real world constraints about rural transport.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So it's really interesting how a number of those points overlapped with points which have been made by other people. So John and Les, I mean, it seems to me that the sort of themes which are coming up through all of those conversations, all of those bits of feedback, how we incentivise and people to feel inclined to take up the great opportunities that are ahead of them, how we address issues of speed and topography and the other sort of barriers to use in our groups, and so also disadvantaged groups and the elderly, how we get people involved, how we integrate the transport. This is the big one. How we integrate transport in a way that makes it really effective across the county, and that, I think, as well, sort of chimes in with the sort of what are the real world solutions, what are the sort of things that people will accept, and that we can all jump in behind and celebrate and support. Can you talk to what you've heard? And we've got about 10-15 minutes.
Right, I'll have 5 of those very quickly first then. So lots of very good points made, and they are very good points, and they're exactly what the situation is like. So first of all, I don't expect, very often councillors like Councillor Gandhi, who I adore, would tell me that she's not going to cycle in from, all the way in from Lentwood on a bike, and I wouldn't expect it. I'd like to see it, but I wouldn't expect her to do that. So we have in Herefordshire, we have about 1/3 of the population in our city. We have about 1/3 in our 4 market towns, or whatever, and we have about 1/3 in the rural areas, in the hamlets. And so all of this is just about providing the right solution, as you're all saying, the right solution for the right place. And it is about being practical and seeing what you can do first. And the very obvious first changes that you could make is around probably the city really, rather than anything else, but to a large extent to the towns as well. And that would be by finding a solution to congestion, getting people to adopt modal shift, and telling people, making sure people feel confident to get on a cycle, on a bicycle, or to walk somewhere. And that would take a huge amount of the traffic off the road and reduce the carbon. And that would allow the space for people who have to use their vehicles at the moment to come in and use them. And that's a sensible precaution, a sensible approach. And just in relation to what Simon was saying, I mean, we have put money aside, well, not money, it's once again, it's one of these kind of capital wish lists for a supercycle highway, which is really, in a way, to allow people to travel between market towns if they'd like to, and to literally be able to cycle into Hereford safely if they could. And it requires a serious investment in infrastructure. You've got to treat it like that. It's potentially £250 million to try and do that throughout the county on a rough costing. But it's possible, and actually that would have added benefits, because it would actually be a tourism boom. There's all sorts of ways of doubling up on the advantages. I mean, I do think we've lived through a period of time now where we are not going to travel ever like we have travelled before. I think that time is over. I really do think that we will never travel in the way, never feel the need to travel in the way that we've travelled before. We are going to do much more by Zoom. We are going to do much more by the internet, but we will still have that need. So it's a case of trying to find the best solution. And I think this, coming back to this issue of integration, is absolutely critical. There is segregation even within the council of departments. Ellie's got Ellie's got a couple of great officers in her department that that help me on some issues, especially cycling. But essentially, they're in her department. But actually, we should all be working much more closely together, and we should have all our plans. We've got a bus. We've almost got a transport, Herefordshire transport kind of planning group. Then we've got a sort of transport kind of big projects group, and then we've got the kind of sustainable guys like Ellie's team, and they're not really, we're asking them to work much more closely together. But that is the critical issue, that everything should be much more integrated and everything should be looked at much more holistically. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a master plan for the county to allow people to travel the best way possible. In terms of carrots and sticks, I'm much more a carrot person. I don't think you really achieve much, especially in Hereford, where capacity is at the moment limited by threatening people with other things. We do have car parking charges for people, unless they slightly out of the city and walking in if they can, or if they want to come in they can, but they just pay a bit of a premium. We've looked at park and rides, and I think a lot of people seem to do park and rides by default anyway, and then they play parking in places like B&Q, including some of our officers, and kind of using that as a park and ride. And I think park and rides work, but park and rides in a way don't entirely solve the problem. And actually, I know that from Oxford, a city, that they have tremendous problems around their park and rides. They have congestion around all their park and rides because you're not necessarily addressing the problem. And they've adopted much more of a sort of ribbon park and ride, where you literally just get a couple, you know, you might get a farmer's field or something like that. So that's all possible, and we can link that to the buses and to the barrel bikes. I'm just trying to pick up on everything else. I think the whole point about it is to be practical and to have a multi-solution approach to everything. But understanding that we really are moving, I think, into a world where we're not going to travel in the same way, and understand the best way to deal with that. Just trying to think now, 20 road space. In terms of bus lanes, I think that was Tony's question. I don't think we have the space in our cities and our towns to bring bus lanes in, and that's just practical. You know, apart from the lovely one that Alpha Beatty shoved at the top of Commercial Street for me a couple of weeks ago. That's about 20 metres long. So we don't have that space, but there are other things you can do to make bus travel attractive. You can have technology that means that when a bus gets to a traffic light, it's allowed to go first. So that there's all sorts of benefits you can do like that. And in terms of what William was saying about incentives, there are. I mean, we're limited always with resource, aren't we? I mean, we're considerable amount of money down a year from government. It's just the way that it goes. Money is often available, but it's often available as capital grants. It's not available in revenue. So it's always trying to find a model that will allow you to keep rewarding people in a certain way. But you can be inventive, and you can look at cards that give advantages to people, that, you know, maybe give 20 or 30% off if they have this card, a bit like the truffle card was, but a revamped version of that. So everything is doable, and everything. I think it's being practical is the absolute critical thing. You know, some people have to travel a certain way for now. Some people could travel a different way now, and start providing them the opportunity to do things differently. Start treating everything as a multi-layered approach, not as a singular solution, and start responding to the fact that the world is changing and that we've asked for it to change. You know, we have. I keep coming back to this point that we have actually signed up to a climate emergency nationally and locally, and you can't keep doing things the way you've been doing it and say you believe in trying to change the trajectory that this planet is on. You have to make changes. You have to invest in doing things a different way, and that doesn't mean it doesn't have to happen overnight. I don't think it even has to hurt, but you've got to start planning for it and be practical about it. I think that's enough waffle.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, John. And Les, would you like to come back on some of this stuff as well and just reflect?
Yeah. I think one of the fundamental challenges is the reduction of carbon emissions from the transport sector. And okay, we can go for carrots, but we also need to go for a lot of sticks. And one of the biggest sticks we've got is stop spending the money on modes of transport or infrastructure which increases the carbon emissions, and start spending it on those initiatives that can be practical, that do lead to radical change of our carbon emissions. So, you know, there's not a lot of time left to do this. I mean, I spent 15 years working on the relationship between climate change and tourism development, and waved bye-bye to lots of tourist destinations where businesses thought things were great, and they don't think that anymore because we've got no snow, or it's far too hot, or people won't go there. Yeah, we do really need to move fairly quickly. For those who are interested in how to look after rural public transport, smart cards, get it all together, integration, I'd advocate you look at the Cornwall Council's website, or you look at Trent Barton buses, or you look at York. I mean, we've got several cities throughout this country that are now going to go heavily for being car-free cities. They won't leave people behind. They'll do it with people behind them. And that's the thing that I'm most interested in. Here we've got a cabinet that wants to actually do things, change things, bearing in mind these critical problems. And I think there's a silent majority out there in Hereford that really we should try to encourage them through behavioural methods or other methods, such as practical methods to get people healthier. As Simon mentioned, Simon from Ross made a great point, you know, about that these modes of transport are very, very healthy, cycling, walking. So all I can say is that when I read one document, it said act courageously. It's there for the taking. This is on decarbonisation of transport in Britain by the government. And another said, this is the Climate Change Committee. The need for action has never been clearer. A message to government is simple. Now do it. And that's my final point, I'm afraid.
Fantastic. Thank you, Les. Yeah, absolutely. Act courageously. So I think we're pretty much at summing up and finishing off. I wanted to say thank you for all the fantastic comments and discussion going on in the chat. I think we'll save that, and there's so much there, and there was so much that came through your questions, which was really helpful, and through your reflections and through your thoughts, which it would be good to note and take forward in any way that we possibly can. And John, to support you, I mean, I think just the last note before I hand back to Gordon, anything that we can do to support the positive activity that's going on and to address media backlash. Any thoughts on that?
I think well, I wouldn't really even ask you to campaign. I'd just be honest and be vocal. You know, people have different points of view, and it's just a matter of getting them across in a fair and balanced way. You know, we've had a bit of backlash. It's fine. We can live with that. You know, Conservatives have plenty of that beforehand, and they lived with it. And it's important just to take on board, you know, as I said before, to make sure you understand what's valid and what's you know, people just shouting. But yeah, just be vocal about what you believe in, and you know, but don't. I think as we start to get things in place, you know, and we start to provide options for people, I think people will like to see that there's different ways of doing things, and that doesn't necessarily mean depriving of anything of anyone. It just means that there's giving them that opportunity.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you very much both. Gordon, I'm going to hand back to you to close and to do the poll.
Okay, well, yeah, as to echo Kate's points, thanks very much to everybody. It was some very good discussions that we've had, and as we will record all this and hopefully not lose it and refer to it in the future. Just to add one point about local project in Kington, we're going to roll out these for people's bins. Because the council can't do what they're trying to do alone, and this is a combination between Kington and Clean. We're just seeing if people wish to participate, they can stick it on their bin. If they don't agree with it, then of course they don't. But anyway, it's just a small area. So overall, I think the points come back to an opportunity that we've got at the moment, and it's a strange opportunity caused by COVID, really, because habits, and we're about transport, habits take about 10 weeks to really get implanted in us. And many of us have changed habits in terms of transport during this past, since March. So we have this limited opportunity to try and take this awful situation as a benefit, and to suggest to people that they can work differently and travel differently. And I'd really encourage that we move quickly on that, and we don't plan for things in years to come. So thanks again, and I'd just like to refer everybody to the membership of HGN. If any, we've got much more updated website, we've got a much more updated events section, and you can stay on and talk to Wendy or one of us about membership or anything if you have any other questions.